There are hundreds of abandoned towns scattered across the world, but some of them feel different. Some were wiped off the map by environmental disasters. Others were built in total secrecy for nuclear programs, Cold War experiments, or classified research projects. These were towns created, funded, or controlled by governments, and when their purpose was finished or became dangerous, they were simply erased. Today we're going through 10 of the strangest abandoned government towns. It all started when the US government quietly erased 2 entire farming towns overnight. In 1943, during the Manhattan Project, the US government selected a section of southeastern Washington to build the world's first large-scale plutonium production complex. Standing in the way were 2 small agricultural communities called Bluffs and Hanford. Residents were told they had a few weeks to pack up and leave. Some were given only days. They were not told why. Both towns were bulldozed, graveyards were dug up and relocated, entire neighborhoods disappeared, and in their place rose the Hanford nuclear site, which produced the plutonium used in the Trinity test and the bomb dropped on Nagasaki. After the Cold War, Hanford became one of the most contaminated places in the United States. Radiation, nuclear waste tanks, and buried chemicals turned the old town sites into a restricted zone. Today, the remains of Bluffs and Hanford are still off-limits, locked behind miles of fencing. The land is so contaminated that experts estimate cleanup will continue for decades. It began with a bargain so cheap it seemed impossible to refuse. In the early 1970s, Times Beach was a quiet riverside town near St. Louis with dirt roads that kicked up dust clouds whenever cars passed through. The town hired a waste hauler named Russell Bliss to spray oil on the roads to keep the dust down. What residents did not know was that Bliss had been mixing the oil with leftover industrial waste from a chemical plant that produced Agent Orange. The waste contained one of the most toxic forms of dioxin ever manufactured. After people started getting sick, animals began dying, and soil tests came back with some of the highest dioxin levels ever recorded, the government evacuated the entire town. In 1983, the US bought every home, every business, and every piece of property. The entire town was destroyed. Today, Times Beach no longer appears on maps. Only a memorial plaque marks where the town once stood. Pyramiden, located on the Svalbard archipelago, was a Soviet coal mining settlement the USSR purchased from Sweden in 1927. By the height of the Cold War, it was a fully functioning community with schools, a cultural center, a hospital, a sports complex, and the northernmost grand piano on Earth. But the Soviet collapse in the 1990s was brutal. Funding dried up, the mine became unprofitable, and in 1998, officials ordered the entire town to be evacuated. People left so quickly that many belongings were never even taken. Newspapers from 1998 still sit on tables. Soviet propaganda still hangs on the walls. The coal carts are still waiting by the tracks. Pyramiden is now government-owned, but abandoned. A few caretakers maintain basic structures, but the town is silent. It is one of the only places in the world where the Soviet Union is still preserved exactly as it was. Residents woke up one morning to sirens telling them to leave, and most never returned. Futaba, located near the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, was one of the towns evacuated after the 2011 earthquake and tsunami triggered a nuclear meltdown. One district, Yamashita, lies directly within the restricted exclusion zone. Here, homes remain exactly as people left them. Bicycles are still parked at school, calendars are frozen on March 2011, weeds have grown into living rooms, entire blocks are collapsing into the streets after years of neglect. Although some areas of Futaba have reopened, Yamashita district remains uninhabitable. It is patrolled, fenced, and monitored constantly because radiation levels in certain spots remain dangerously high. The Japanese government expects some parts will not be safe again for decades. In the 1960s, the US secretly built an entire town under Greenland's ice sheet, and most people never knew it existed. Camp Century was constructed by the US Army as a part of a Cold War project to test whether nuclear missiles could be hidden and fired from beneath the ice. The public was told the camp camp was for scientific research. In reality, it was connected to something called Project Iceworm, a classified plan to build a network of launch sites underneath Greenland. The camp had sleeping quarters, tunnels, kitchens, a chapel, a hospital, and even a barber shop. Everything operated under the ice. When the ice shifted more quickly than expected, the tunnels began warping. The project was abandoned in 1966. The US left behind machinery, fuel, and radioactive waste from its portable nuclear reactor. Today, the remains of Camp Century are still buried somewhere beneath the ice. As climate change melts parts of Greenland, scientists warn that the hazardous materials may eventually be exposed. The government told residents the ground beneath their homes could collapse at any moment, and they were right. Picher was once one of the most productive mining towns in the United States. During World War I and World War II, the government relied heavily on Picher's lead and zinc mines, but decades of unregulated mining left behind massive piles of contaminated waste called chat. People started developing severe lead poisoning. Waterways turned orange, and sinkholes began swallowing roads and houses. In 2006, federal officials issued a full buyout of the town. In 2008, an EF4 tornado ripped through the region, destroying much of what remained. Cleanup crews determined it was safer to remove what was left than to rebuild. Today, Picher is completely abandoned. Warning signs around the town tell people not to drink the water, breathe the dust, or walk near unstable ground. For decades, the Soviet Union tested some of the most dangerous biological weapons on Earth in total secrecy. Vozrozhdeniya Island, located in the Aral Sea, once housed a Soviet bioweapons laboratory where scientists tested plague, tularemia, and most notoriously, anthrax. At the edge of the island sat the small worker town of Kantubek. Residents were scientists, military personnel, and their families. They had homes, schools, and shops, but everything around them was heavily restricted. Research on deadly pathogens took place just beyond the town limits. In the 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the facility was abandoned. Workers left quickly, the town emptied almost overnight, and years later, US teams discovered that tons of anthrax spores had been buried in pits near Kantubek. The spores were still active, and today the town is completely deserted. Buildings crumble in the desert wind. The Aral Sea has receded, turning the island into a peninsula. Built in the 1950s by the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, Mercury served as the main residential community for workers at the Nevada test site. Thousands of nuclear tests were conducted in the surrounding desert, many of them atmospheric during the early years. Mercury had restaurants, dormitories, a bowling alley, a movie theater, and government offices. Everything there was classified. Workers could not talk about their jobs, and many of the projects taking place at the test site remained top secret for years. As testing slowed down in the 1990s, the population shrank. Entire blocks were shuttered. Many buildings were demolished. Today, Mercury still technically exists, but it is a controlled government compound with large sections abandoned, and the public cannot enter. Imagine a town being locked down permanently because of something no one will fully explain. Yumen, once a thriving oil town in western China, was partially abandoned after petroleum productions slowed. But the strangest part came in 2014 when the Chinese government sealed off parts of the town after a resident died from bubonic plague. Armed checkpoints blocked all entry and exit. Entire districts were emptied. Streets were silent. Officials have never released full details about how widespread the infection was or why extreme measures were taken so quickly. Satellite imagery shows that some sections of Yumen remain abandoned years later. Homes are empty, businesses are shuttered, large areas appear to have been permanently depopulated without public explanation. A town disappeared because a weapons testing range simply grew around it. Arden was once a small rail town southwest of Las Vegas. In the mid-20th century, the US military expanded weapons testing across Nevada, gradually absorbing huge amounts of of land. The area surrounding Arden became part of a classified training and testing corridor. Rail yards closed, businesses shuttered, families moved away. By the 1970s, the town was essentially gone. The government later restricted access to much of the land for defense experiments. Today, only fragments of Arden remain. Old foundations, a few forgotten structures, some railroad remnants. Everything else is part of a vast network of testing grounds used for military research. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I'll see you again soon. Goodbye!